All right, I'd like to call to order the policy committee meeting on November 1st, noting all board members are present. I would need a
Motion to
motion to
accept,
approve the agenda.
make that motion.
So I have a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I did not receive any public comments, so I think we'll jump right into policies, and I'll turn that over to Randy.
All right, awesome. Thanks. Appreciate Ted meeting with us here and given all the meetings you guys have had. But we just thought we would kind of keep moving these forward. So there's maybe a dozen policies here in front of you. This one's a little bit different than we saw in the past in that they're relatively specific ones to Waunakee. So actually the School Board Association's attorneys recommending we keep most of the ones that we have. But I've had our team go through and look at them to see if they're still accurate or if there's anything else we wanted to modify. So that's generally what I'm going to review here today. So starting off with 432 and the associated accompanying ones with that. This just talks about attendance areas. I think the only thing that we've changed here is we had a typo in the second paragraph, and then we had a reference that we wanted to make sure was referencing a new policy we created for homeless children. So 432, we would recommend keeping as is, and then just make those modifications. 432 rule, this is one with regards to intra-district transfers. So these are where there's transfers that occur between our schools. This is primarily in elementary, between the elementary schools. Sometimes we have transfers that are requested. Sometimes there's ones that we prompt. This is the policy that generally is followed. All that we've really changed here on the first page of the rule, we just put in the words such as, because we have kind of evolving programs. But right now it's really looking at students with disabilities or our special education students, our English learners, and just wanting to kind of better articulate that and then use the word such as in the event that there was another group that we determined in the future. That gives at least an example of how we could utilize that. The rest of the policy, as we reviewed it, is in line with what our current practice is. And this is something that seems to be working well for us. The exhibits are just a couple different flow charts. I've had our team review them, and those also are still accurate with what we are currently doing. So,
And as we've done in the past, unless there was an objection, we'll kind of Randall go through these and then we'll take it all at once.
Yep.
I like that.
Sounds good. Yeah. The next one, 334, is release time for student work experience. So this is anything that we kind of classify under workplace learning. So this is apprenticeships, co-ops, etc. This is just the policy that kind of articulates that. We changed the word work experience to workplace learning, just to be more up to date on some of the work that occurs there. So this just means it basically can happen. The next one, responsibility release program. This is actually one that it's actually listed in, if you go back to one of our previous policies we reviewed on attendance, it was listed in there as the responsibility release program at the high school was allowed for students for attendance purposes. As we looked at this is kind of more of just a rule of kind of the rules that we follow with it. So our recommendation is actually to repeal it, because this is articulated in kind of the administrative rules and the handbook at the high school. It's already listed in policy in our attendance policy as allowable, but we didn't feel we needed this level of detail in a board policy to help manage that program. So this is one that we recommend repeal. .435 is student dismissal precautions. This is one that's just an old policy, and as we reviewed it, it's nowhere close to even being what we do. This is actually stating that you would, before a student can be dismissed from school for the day, you have to have the clearance of the principal. So with attendance secretaries and automation of attendance, And basically, we feel that there's no need for this policy. It's also kind of articulated in our attendance policies and how we check students out. And that you actually see that in the next. I think what I did here, I think I repealed this one, but what I'm gonna do is make 335 is the rule. So the next page shows kind of, they had, our current policies have 435, which is the short policy. And then you have a rule that's associated with it. As we reviewed it, we're recommending to repeal the language that's in our original 435 and then move over modified language from the rule to actually become the dismissal policy. And really all it's going to state is that we have parent permission and school authorization is needed before a student can leave school. Students must sign out in the office, and students who need to leave because of an accident or illness will be dismissed through the office. So those are really the precautions that we'll make into the policy. So repeal the first part, make the rule, modified rule, the current policy, which really simplifies down the language. Okay. Student expressive activities. This is one that, Ted, when you and I reviewed it, I said we were going to run past our attorney. He reviewed it and he felt that what we have here is appropriate. And so he recommended that we keep the policy. So this was one that the School Board Association stated that we should just keep our current policy. As we reviewed it, we also wanted another set of eyes on it. So I had our attorney Kirk Strang look at it. He agreed that this is the one, that this is one that we should also keep. And he felt that the language, particularly under number 5, we were questioning whether that was still the most current, and he agreed that it was. A lot of this is just kind of going back and reiterating some things that come out of state statute, and then also it references some things in the bottom with regards to court cases on student expression. So this one is fine. Student involvement in decision making. I think this is one we're going to keep our current policy. Because this is just basically saying we want to involve our students. And then 442.1, which talks about student government. Our thought is that we would repeal that one. We feel that the first policy really talks about how we involve students, and our student government at our schools is actually more astute than just the student council. And I think this was written at a time where student council was kind of your primary leadership entity within the school district or within the high school. Right now we have student council, we have principals council, we have different leadership councils that are led by different administrators. And we felt that we don't really need the student government policy, but we think that that's covered under student involvement and decision making. The last one we have was with regards to student representation on the board.
Randy, just coming back to that.
Oh, sure.
You get members of the student council shall be elected democratically. You mentioned all these other councils. You know, how do you put those? Was there a process for getting those kids on?
There are. I mean, some of them, like principals council, Brian looks for kids that aren't on. He looks for kids that aren't represented on some of the other councils. So he's looking at principals council. He might grab somebody from, I'm not sure how he actually does it, but he chooses kids that you're normally not hearing their voices. It was something that Brian Thurston started years ago, and it's kind of just he uses it differently than student council. Student council is planning a lot of the student events, and I think principals council is ones where he's kind of also this kind of, they don't plan events, but they kind of become a voice to the principal as far as what's going on and what's happening in school. So some of that's appointed. Student council has ebbed and flowed over time as far as how you get on it. Sometimes it's elected. Sometimes anybody who's signed up has been able to get onto it. It all depends on what level of interest there has been. And I think that's why when we reviewed this, some of this is articulated within kind of just their their administrative rules at the high school, and it's a piece that they have different leadership groups there. And we have one for sports where the athletic director has kind of a captain's council or a captain's piece, so they do some of those things as well. And we felt that this just only focused on one. Yep. And then student representation on the board, this is kind of one that impacts all of you. We modified it simply from, I mean, there's a couple things just with kind of how we reference students in the first paragraph, but then also looking at item number 5, looking at someone who was just a student at the high school versus being junior status. We go back a couple of years, we had a student rep who was here for 3 years, actually was appointed by the student council as in her sophomore year, and then she served here for 3 years. So we just took out the reference, and that was per my request, just so that you didn't limit anybody at the high school who might want to be serving in that capacity. But this does come out of the student council.
I found it interesting that they're a student representation to the board. They shall represent the views of students enrolled in the district on agenda items that are regularly. The kids don't make any comments about what's
They
on
don't.
the agenda.
They know they can, but they
Okay,
just
they
don't. Yeah, and I meet with the students periodically before they start on the board. I always express to them what's going on
Okay,
and what kind of what their role is. I think recently they've just done a much more in-depth job of wanting to talk about what are the views of kids at the high school and try to represent more of the student groups. It's probably a good reminder for them that as we send out our agenda, that for them to look at it, and we can send it to them ahead of time. It's probably a good reminder for that, Judy.
yeah, I felt like they were telling us what the
Yeah.
kids are doing.
Kind of more current events that they give us.
Yeah, which I think is fine, but I wonder if there was,
It also, I guess, gives you the opportunity, if there are agenda items that you want more student voice on, that's the group you go to.
okay.
That's where you start. I mean, you can start with
Well,
them
that's
if there's
good to know.
something that you're
Yeah, I
curious
was
about.
interested in that.
And we've utilized for that at different times. And occasionally you'll hear them bring up just opinions. You heard like their opinion on like the cell phone policy this year. That they didn't like it, they understood it, but so there's some of those things you may hear about, but yeah, we can make sure that we do a little better job of making sure that they know more of some of the agenda items, and if they have opinions to bring those forward. But it's also, I guess, something for you as board members to know that they're kind of your reps too, to serve in the
kids.
capacity that you'd like to utilize.
You know, I guess if they're giving opinions, it would be nice if they're surveying or at least talking to, you know, different groups within the building. But as opposed to just reading the agenda and saying, hey, that's the way it should go.
Yeah, it's probably one to let them know if there's some things that are coming up that you want their opinion on. They would, I'm sure that particularly the kids we have right now would go out and find all that. They would find that very
Sure. They know how to
intriguing.
ask.
Absolutely. Good point. So those are all the policies for this morning. So like
Well,
I
I
said,
make
this
a
is a
motion
relatively
that we-
quick one, but we wanted to keep the whole process moving so we don't get bogged down at other times.
Make a motion that we accept the recommendations stated here.
Which is keeping all of them, repealing 434.1 and
Mhm.
442.1.
Correct.
Right.
So the motion's made. Seconded. All in favor?
I,
And that brings us to the end, I believe. So I'd say, well, future meetings, we have figured out. I think we have
Yeah,
some.
we've got to figure out where we're gonna be with our administrative review, because
Yeah.
those are pretty meaty ones. We're starting to get into things like discipline and some of the other pieces that we need to make sure that they're lining up with. A lot of our policies, when we get into these more specific topics, are restating in a different way state law. But there are some things that we add in occasionally that are just more specific to either issues we've had, et cetera. So we're making sure that those are articulated. And making sure that there are some things that that we have some thoughts on that we want to see with our attorney, if that's the direction we should go in on. So you'll see those at the
so
next batch.
when we make policy, we can be stricter than the law, but we can't be more lenient. with the law.
And that's part of that's part of our question on a couple things is. At what point can we be, probably can't be more lenient than the law, but you can be more stringent in certain cases, I believe. And those are some of the questions that we have with regards to a few items. Particularly around some of the alcohol and drug related items. I mean, that's kind of an evolving issue for us, and wanting to make sure that the language that we have in there represents what we're trying to do. Because there's things in there that it certainly represents kind of the new technologies of vaping, etc. But we also have language in ours with regards to lookalikes. And we want to make sure that that's something that we maintain in there and just see what the current law is stating. So we'll bring that back next time, but they're going to be a little bit heftier than the ones you saw here today.
You know, when it comes to discipline, you know, different districts do different things. How do we articulate to new students coming in what our policies are so that, you know, if there's a district that's lenient, stringent, you know, and I would assume that not everybody has the same policies.
They have similar policies. They have state law kind of gives you broad representation of what you do. So how you determine what you're going to utilize for suspension and expulsion has a lot of subjectivity to it, except in the areas of like firearms or some of those things. And districts do handle those differently. At the beginning of the year, particularly at the high school, they do class meetings. And in those class meetings, they generally touch on what are those things that are held for expectations for our students. But there are certain situations, as we've talked about this year, that we need to make sure people understand kind of our policies with regards to vaping, different forms of THC, etc., are different than some of our districts around us, and trying to make sure that we articulate that to students, because that's where we had an issue earlier this year.
Maybe a little to point, you know, for co-curriculars, you have a meeting. We go over all of that stuff, and maybe you're saying when students are coming in, what is kind of the orientation view, that is there one, or you know, you're given a handbook, and
yeah, and they touch on most of those during their class meetings the first day of school, and that's part of what they're meeting with the freshman, sophomore, junior, senior class. But I know that was one of the pieces that we kind of flagged this year was, do we have to be more specific on areas that we know that some new students coming from other districts, without pinpointing specific districts, and just kind of targeting kids that come from different districts that we know are different. But that's a piece that we've already articulated, that we have to figure out how we do a better job with when we have kids that move in. Because we do deal with some things differently than others. It's kind of that expulsion, pre-expulsion type stuff. It's kind of what we've talked about at the board level.
all right, anything else?
Nope.
I'll take the motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.